apprentice. He's been under his tutelage for a long time now. Russia, holding them accountable. Sean gets the answers no one else does. Freedom is back in style. Welcome to the revolution. Information on breaking news and more bold, inspired solutions for America.
All right, hour two, Sean Hannity Show. We're waiting. The White House is going to have some announcement. I think it's going to have to do with the concessions that the president has secured from the Europeans to avoid a trade war. And this is interesting because I'm looking at it, and this is pretty amazing. And it's what I said would happen. How many times, Linda, did I not say over and over again, there's not gonna be a trade war? The president's negotiating. Well, we now have some of the details have finally emerged, and that the president secured concessions from Europe, that it's not going to be a trade war. Dow Jones reporting, it just came before the Trump European Commission president, they're going to have this joint presser coming up, and the major averages rallied on the news. He negotiates. It's what he does. And anyway, so the NASDAQ went up about 1%. The Dow Industrial went up about 0.5%. Way these GDP numbers on Friday are going to be pretty amazing from all indications. We'll see for the second quarter. But here's what the president got. The Europeans agreed to lower industrial tariffs and import more U.S. soybeans. The Europeans agreed to work on more U.S. liquefied natural gas exports. And Trump also said he's hoping to work something out on a fair trade deal with Europe. And they're going to have probably more details when they speak. We're literally watching a little box outside of the White House. I think it's on the South Lawn. And in the meantime, we got news today, and I think this is great news. I've known about this case forever. We've talked about this case. And that is the American pastor. His name is Andrew Brunson, a U.S. citizen from North Carolina, spent nearly 21 months imprisoned in Turkey because he's a Christian. And the pastor has been on trial for the crime of Christianization. And our friend Jay Sekulow in the American Center for Law and Justice, we have confirmed that the Turkish government has now issued an order releasing Pastor Andrew Brunson from prison, allowing him to be returned to his home in Turkey. This is the first critical step that we believe will result in the freedom of Pastor Brunson so he can return to the United States and be reunited with his family. And while all of this is going on, a really contentious hearing with the Senate and the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, and let's go back to that, and we'll go to the White House when that announcement happens. Thoughts on that?
So I have a personal experience. I had a private conversation with North Koreans. We didn't issue a readout on the conversations quite intentionally, and the North Korean press chose to characterize it. We thought it was in America's best interest not to respond tit for tat about the nature of that conversation. We knew the truth. We knew what had taken place there. And, it's the North Korean press. And so I assume that most reasonable people will discount it fairly significantly, the same way that one might the Russian press. These are important decisions about how much disclosed about private conversations were had, because everyone knows that you may have an expectation that you'll have another private conversation one day. And the absence of their belief that that private conversation has the capacity to remain in that space reduces the freedom to have those conversations. I know you've had this in your life too, Senator. I know you've had private conversations and you valued them. It was just you and someone else in that room, and it was important. And you didn't give anyone a readout from it because you wanted to have the chance to do that again because you thought you could make real progress with that person.
Let's talk about North Korea. You brought it up. You mentioned that you traveled to North Korea to continue on, as you put it, I guess, to follow up on commitments made in Singapore. Let's talk about those commitments for a minute. You mentioned that they have committed to denuclearization. They may have a different readout than we do on what that entails. But so far, they seem to be walking back any commitment, a real commitment that was made there. What commitment, firm commitment, other than discussion of returning remains? I'm not discounting that, but in terms of denuclearization, what real commitments were made?
Yeah, I'm not going to get into the private commitments that have been shared. I don't think it's fair to characterize them walking back from commitments. Remember where we were, right? So it all depends what you draw as the projected line to say, are we in a better place or a worse place than we would have been absent the Singapore summit? One can draw counterfactual references. We'll never know where we might have been. But I will concede there is an awful long way to go. I'm not trying to oversell the accomplishments that we've had towards the path of denuclearization to date. There remains a great deal of work to do. It will be highly contested. That is, the modalities, the means, the timing of this will be things that I'm confident we'll be discussing for a period of time. There have been public reports, and I know the United States is tracking the disassembly of a missile engine test site, something that Chairman Kim committed orally. It wasn't in the written agreement itself, but Chairman Kim committed in his conversation with President Trump to do. They're beginning to dismantle that. It has to do with their missile program. It's a good thing. Steps forward.
Okay. Thank you. Quickly, for the time is out, something completely different. The country of Rwanda right now, and you may be familiar with this because of this week's focus on religious freedom,
yes,
has indicated a move toward severe restrictions on religious freedom, particularly from outside groups. What are the plans of the State Department to let them know that is not in their own interest nor ours?
Senator, I share your concerns. I'll need to get back to you in terms of what actions we think we can take. I know we'll call it out. I know we'll label it for what it is. We do need to see what it is tragic, and anyway, I share your concerns there. It's a huge challenge for us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Kaine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Mr. Secretary, just a couple of thoughts. I was very discouraged at the Helsinki summit when the president basically was offered a choice in some of the questions that he believed U.S. intel, or did he believe Vladimir Putin's protestations that he had engaged in hacking of the election. And he basically said, my own people have made a great case to me. Vladimir Putin has made a great case to me. I don't see why Russia would have done this. He came back and corrected it the next day in the United States, but at the end he said, I believe my intel community, but there's a lot of people out there, it could have been someone else. And then this dragged on for a couple of days. You know where I live. You know I have a lot of constituents who used to be your employees at the CIA. People come up to me all the time in Virginia and say, I'm with the IC, and they are very demoralized by this. They're very demoralized that when standing next to Vladimir Putin, the president's words were to suggest that he trusted Vladimir Putin over them. There was the suggestion when President Trump said it was an incredible offer about Ambassador McFaul, that he was also potentially willing to throw not just intel folks under the bus, but State Department diplomats under the bus. They live in Virginia too. They feel the demoralization about your comments today, that we're going to go to bat for current reformer. That's very, very helpful. But what I want to ask you about is our military and our military leadership. There was an article yesterday in the Washington Post. General Joseph F. Dunford, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, as of Monday, Dunford still hadn't been briefed on Helsinki, even though it directly affects more than 1 million troops Dunford overseas. Do you know why there have been no briefing of General Dunford about the discussions that took place at Helsinki?
Senator, you have to ask the Department of Defense or Chairman Dunford.
But you don't dispute that was, you have no knowledge that there was a briefing of General Dunford today about the Helsinki discussion, do you?
Senator, you just read me a piece from the Washington Post.
Yeah, but I'm asking your knowledge. Do you have any knowledge that the administration has shared discussions about U.S.-Russia military issues with the head of the United States Joint Chiefs of Staff?
I've actually spoken with Chairman Dunford about it. I was with him yesterday in a series of meetings, and we had a chance to have a conversation about it, yes.
Okay,
about our plan, absolutely.
Okay, so yesterday may have been the first time he was briefed about it. I want to ask about General...
possible, yes.
I was going to ask about General Votel, the information that Senator Shaheen mentioned earlier. He expressed wariness about working with Russia, and the Russian